Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the AXR Sales Director Incubator, the program that helps you make great career decisions. My name is Mike Dixon. I lead the sales and marketing practice for AXR Recruitment and Search. And today's guest is Chris Shaw, Sales Director of Diageo. Now, Chris started his career in finance with PwC before moving into the drinks industry. He's held roles in marketing and leading multiple channels within sales before taking on his current role, leading the sales function for Diageo in Australia, New Zealand, and South Pacific. He's also chair of the Embrace Difference Council of the Drinks Association. So welcome, Chris. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Great to be here. And looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. Yeah, likewise. I'm also very interested to talk to somebody in the drinks industry at this particular time. It's an industry probably close to everyone's heart as we start to kind of get back out to the pubs and clubs of this world. So it's good to we'll check in on that and how where we're going. But before we do, Chris, as always, we want to just ask a bit of an icebreaker, get into things. And one of the areas that I'd love to touch on, we've done this once before, but just thinking more broadly about life, and I guess at perhaps a more altruistic level. But if you've sat on lots of leadership teams, we'll get into that as we go through the conversation. But if there was one board or leadership group you could sit on in any organization globally, what would you pick?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, I've got a real interest in new ideas and people that generate new ideas. There's a company, Sequoia Capital, in the US, which is a venture capital firm that I think would be really fascinating to sit on. It no doubt introduces a lot of new ideas to the world with many businesses that it invests in. There's a range of different people that no doubt pitch to that organisation for funding to get them started, and I think they've got a great track record of selecting the winners. I mean, they've backed everything from WhatsApp to Strava to Stripe, Oracle, even Apple, and I think even perhaps Facebook as well. So, it'll be a great experience, I think, to sit on a board of a business like that and hear from entrepreneurs who've got such great ideas that can bring such new concepts to the world that arguably change the world as well in many cases. So I think a business like that, a venture capital firm, where you've got access to so many great thinkers and great ideas, would be a pretty fascinating place to be. The impact that has on the future of how people operate would be pretty interesting, I reckon.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. It'd be like Shark Tank for real on steroids, wouldn't it? Yeah, that'd be amazing. Fantastic. I mentioned in your intro, Chris, that you didn't start out life in sales. You kind of came a little bit circuitous route. But talk to me about the early days. PwC, and we find you today as the sales director for Diageo. How did you actually get into sales?
Yeah, it's a funny story. I mean, I was fortunate enough as a youngster to experience a high professional sports team or high performing professional sports team. So I thankfully did just enough work at university to graduate there, and actually went into the sporting world, but that finished rather abruptly for one reason or another, and found myself working for PricewaterhouseCoopers on a graduate program in corporate finance. So I did that for about a year and a half. It was a great foundation for understanding the concepts of finance and, a really strong commercial background. But just decided at a point in time it wasn't really for me. So I did a bit of traveling and came back to Australia, and I had a fairly empty wallet at the time. Funny story being that I ended up working, I think it was about 48 days straight on the end of a jackhammer up in Brisbane trying to save some cash. And I found a little advertisement in the paper that said merchandiser for drinks business. And I spoke to my brother at the time. He was at Mars, and he was a territory manager at Mars. And I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, there's no bad choice at this point in time. So why don't you give it a go?" And I went into the interview, and the interview was with a business called United Distillers and Vintners, and that was a precursor to Diageo. Anyone who knows the history of Diageo. And I took a role as a merchandiser, and my role was in Western Brisbane, and often it was facing up Bundy rum cans in a fridge and building great displays to entice shoppers to get to know our portfolio. And it was interesting. It's a different way to almost fall into sales, but for me, it almost made sense, because if I think back to the environments of those sports teams that I really enjoyed, it was there was a lot of structure and discipline around what we did. I really enjoyed working with great teams of people, and it was really performance and results oriented. And sales had all of those things for me. So I really enjoyed the experience working in sales, and have done so for the majority of my career. So, an interesting and probably different way of somewhat falling into the roles, but equally one that makes sense at the same time based on the attributes, if you like, of the function.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's probably the first person, no doubt, who's gone from elite sport to a kind of PwC environment to a jackhammer to sales. It's a different pathway. What was your sport? What were you playing?
So I was fortunate enough to play rugby for Australia at underage levels, at sort of under 19s and under 21s, and it finished fairly abruptly. I was unfortunately had some bad surgery, so it didn't go too much further after the age of about 21. But I had some great experiences, and did some great travelling, and played with some amazing players who went on and had fantastic careers with Australia. And they've done brilliantly, both on the sports field and now off it as well.
Yeah, well, rugby's my main sport too. I'm loving watching the Wallabies having a bit of a resurgence. So long may that continue.
Yeah, it's good to see.
Until they play Scotland next month, obviously. Then we'll see where my allegiance really lies then.
I'm torn too. I'm actually born in New Zealand, so I often get torn between the All Blacks as well. So.
Yeah. Well, I get you. And interestingly, as your careers progress and you've done lots of different things within Diageo, Chris, but have you ever stopped and kind of thought, there's a different pathway here? Have you ever kind of had that wavering moment? Yeah,
I mean, look, I've been at Diageo for 18 years, and I think it's hard not to have thoughts about alternatives. I mean, if you're in a business for that long, I think it's rare that you probably wouldn't have any thoughts about a different path. And I have, and I think there's nothing to shy away from in my eyes to do that. I think being naturally inquisitive is a good thing. Trying to understand what's going on in different organisations, different industries. It helps you learn. It helps you bring in a set of new ideas and a set of new perspectives as well. So, I mean, entrepreneurship has always been one that has been of interest to me, and I'm sure many others as well. That's one that I've often dabbled in. Equally, going back to finance is something that I've explored as well. So. I mean, I think it's a natural part of the evolution of one's career is to explore different alternatives. And I don't think any experience is a bad experience either. I mean, if you choose to make the choice around moving to another industry, another function, another business, all experiences are great experiences for whatever role you do next. So I think it's a natural part of the journey of one's career.
Yeah, agreed. I think one of the things I've talked often about is when I meet people who are at junctions in their career or on these types of conversations is that, don't shut down anything too early. Be open to a conversation. The more experiences you gather, the more effective you're going to be as a leader going forward. If you maintain a very narrow focus, and actually you end up becoming less effective as a leader and less competitive for senior roles as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to get into too, Chris, is often people look at someone in a new role and they think, you're kind of there, you've done it, that you must be, have such a knowledge base and compared to someone in formative career stages, you do. But, are you, in terms of ongoing development, what does a sales director do? Is it about programs? Is it about, do you find that out yourself? How do you get support in terms of your ongoing development?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of bits of that. I think what does a sales director do to sort of answer that? I think for me, and how I tend to approach the role is certainly from a people perspective. I mean, there's a large team of people that I would argue any sales director leads in their role, and I think it's important to make sure that you create the environment for people to be able to be at their best. We talk a lot about liberation at Diageo and trying to create the space for people to operate at their best, and I think that's one of the key roles of a sales director. That can be not only through setting great visions and kind of co-creating the ambition of what you're trying to achieve with your team, but also then clearing the pathway for them to do that. So I think there's a big piece around people and sort of co-creating a vision for the team to go after. Naturally, there's a big piece of customer management as well. having great relationships and continuing to build great relationships with your partners is a key part of the role, and certainly one that I really enjoy. We're very fortunate in the industry that we're in that we can do that in a really hospitable environment. So yeah, it's a big draw card for me in this industry. And then I think that the last piece is working collectively with your executive peers, really to lead the organisation in the right direction. Setting the strategy for the business and then cascading that through in a way that makes sense for your own commercial team, your own sales team. So I think there's a bit to how a sales director can operate in their role, and no doubt a little bit differently in each business, but that's it for me. In terms of development, we were talking earlier about the skills required in getting to the sales director level and then also succeeding at the sales director level. And I think there's no doubt having great functional skills in sales is one of the attributes that will hold you in really good stead for doing the role. Those functional skills are a natural prerequisite for a role. But equally, there's a lot that once you step into the role, you almost feel like you need to unlearn to able to do the role successfully as well. And I think, talking specifically about the area of development for me, it's about empowering the team and not stepping in too much. Talking earlier about liberating the team and offering that environment for them to succeed, and that's probably mine. Is I spent a lot of my career doing the functional skills to get to a role like this, and now it's about creating the environment for others to deliver those functional skills or demonstrate those functional skills to do the role. So it's almost stepping away from the strength that you have once you get into the leadership role that is the challenge, and unlearning some of the things that have got you to where you got to today. And that, I argue, would be probably my biggest and continued growth opportunity.
Interesting. And as a sales director, or you in particular, Chris, who kind of challenges you and then, in that sense, and ensures that you are keeping focused? Or if you've got an inclination to jump in, they're saying, hey, hold back, you need to release these people and let them go. Is that the HR director? Is that the MD? Or do you have external mentors? How does that work?
Look, I think it can come from anywhere. I mean, I certainly have a great relationship with my line manager. He gives me great counsel about when to step in, what to be more directive around, as opposed to what to be more supportive around. So that's helpful. But I think it can come from anywhere. I mean, I often ask the team for input around the best way to approach certain problems and how much support's needed, whether there's an opportunity to create a space for them to do it, or equally step in as well. And then I think external counsel is really helpful too. So having an external set of mentors outside the organisation that you're in that can give you a bit of an impartial perspective is quite useful. So I think that advice can come from anywhere. I think it can come top down, it can come bottom up, and it can come from a sort of lateral perspective inward. All advice is useful, and I think one's got to be humble enough to be able to ask for it from anywhere. Everyone can give you a great perspective, and then you just take that and make the best choice you can.
Yeah, great. And talking of mentors, one of the things I'm always interested in, if again, kind of back to this kind of, I guess, bigger question, but if you could pick anybody in the world to be a mentor, is there somebody you could look at and think, oh, I'd love to kind of have that person to give me counsel from time to time?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's one, I'll mention too, that one in particular, there's and it probably goes back a little bit to the sporting background, but there's a gentleman by the name of Gilbert Anoka. And Gilbert Anoka he was until recently, he was a mental skills coach for the All Blacks. And for those that know that team, they've got a great culture and a great high performance sporting environment. They're the most successful international sports team on the planet. And Gilbert Anoka was the mental skills coach for that team for many, many years. I think now his role in that team is manager of leadership. And he does a lot with the leaders of that organisation and leaders of that team to actually get them to a space of a great mindset, great leadership, and building great culture. So I think that would be an amazing mentor to have in someone who can really point to the attributes of what it takes to build a great team and a great environment as well. So that would be one. I think the other one, and I'm going to stay on the theme of New Zealand, is actually their current Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. I think she's been a great role model particularly for women. I think she's really demonstrated, I think, to a lot of leaders in the world how to manage crises really well. I mean, there was tragedy in Christchurch with some unfortunate terrorist acts down there a couple of years back. There's a White Island tragedy that happened, and then more recently COVID. And I think her way that she has managed crises is very different to how other leaders have managed it around the world. And the empathy that she's shown to get through those periods with that country, I think, has been second to none. She's done it with a real balance of sort of work life at the same time. She's had children while she's been in that role. And I just think she's a great role model for other people to be able to follow, and a very different path that's been taken in leadership compared to many others. So I think probably either or both of those New Zealanders would be a real asset to have on your team as mentors.
I'm a fan of both, actually. I read all about Gilbert Enoka in the leadership book Legacy.
Yeah, I was about to say James Kerr. If for anyone who's listening, there's a great book written by James Kerr called Legacy. And I must admit, I'm not a huge reader of management books, but if anyone wants to read a fantastic book about culture and values, that book Legacy by James Kerr is outstanding.
Yeah, it really is. I think from the outside looking in, and I used to live in New Zealand too, so a lot of Kiwi friends. Jacinda is doing an amazing job, in my view. So I agree with you there. In terms of career path, and again, everyone's pathway forward is different, and not everyone's end destination is different. But for those who are looking at you, Chris, and thinking, I'd love to do that role one day, and if they stay in the sales channel, is that enough? Is that going to give them enough to kind of get to be a sales director, or have they got to step out and do other things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think functionally, when you think about the functional skills of sales, I think probably the answer, if it was just that, would be yes. But I think the sales director role is much more than that. One of the things that you need to get is a breadth of experiences outside of those core sales and functional capabilities. And as I said earlier, I genuinely think any experience is a good experience. But if you're, for example, in an FMCG firm or a CPG firm, and you've got those functional skills in sales, the other bits that you need as an addition to make you successful are everything from ideally category, category management. There's pieces around understanding the concepts of marketing, the concepts of finance. So that is a more rounded package, I think, that presents more functional skills to allow you to succeed in the role. But without doubt, the biggest thing that's the change when you get into a role as a sales director is around the leadership aspects. And there are definitely elements of that one can learn in different roles through their career as one progresses towards a sales director. But I think when you actually step into the chair, there is a different perspective that is offered when you're in that role, and I think I would argue that there's an opportunity to try and foster those experiences when you're in the roles leading up to that next step. And that might be, if you're leading certain business units or you're leading certain functions within your organisation, those opportunities to really lead across the organisation and sort of upward into the executive of your organisation as well are really key skills to be able to develop. So I think if you were just talking about the functional skills of sales and you're an expert in that, it's definitely going to hold you in good stead. And to do the functional elements of a sales director, I'd say they're okay, but it's not just the functional elements that are needed for a sales director role. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more around leadership. There's a lot more around the understanding and breadth. So I think those other experiences are equally valuable prerequisites to get to a role like this as well.
I think when you look at the modern sales professional, particularly in, say, a national account manager, business manager role, it's stretched so much over the years, particularly recently, so that you're always playing that mini general manager of your customer, connecting all the different parts of the business together. So I think you get exposure to lots of parts of the organization. And I think, but forming those bridges and thinking about pursuing those bridges into other opportunities is never a bad thing. As back to what we said before, any experience is a good experience. What about leaving your sector? Because I often get approached with people who say, I've sat in this kind of sector for a while. I wouldn't mind doing something else, but can I get back? Is it risky to kind of jump out completely and try something very left field?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about different experiences that can build on one's career. And I think you're always going to be better for the job you do next, for the job you do before, no matter what that choice is. And if that's stepping out of the sector that you're more familiar with and moving into a totally foreign area, there's no doubt opportunities for you to learn in that space. And it might be from a different customer set, it might be from a different category that has different dynamics, and it might be from a different consumer. And all of those elements are valuable if you were to then step back into your existing industry or your existing field. Equally, if you were to step even further afield and say move from consumer into a tech world as an example. Yeah. Having those experiences and understanding e-commerce better, or understanding what it takes to build merchant platforms for growing businesses. If you were to step back in, we've obviously got a really accelerated adoption of e-commerce in the consumer space, and that's a valuable asset as well. So I think there are attributes that you can always bring from other experiences into roles that whatever role you may choose to do next. So I don't think going outside of your knowledge base or your core skill set, your core industry expertise is a bad thing. And I always think that there's opportunities to come back with greater experiences and a greater depth of knowledge that you can apply to the business that you may be in today.
And what about going to startups or those fast growth accelerated businesses that they're can on one hand be very appealing? It comes with risk. Same philosophy. If because I approach I recruit for tier ones, mid tiers, but I love getting involved in the fast growth startups as well. And sometimes I approach a candidate from a tier one, and it's like, ooh, that feels like a big risk, and I get that completely. But what's your take on it?
Well, I don't think there's any one tried and tested path to get to a sales director role. Mine's probably been a bit more conservative, to be frank, than some others. It's been a bit more within a single organisation, despite being in a number of different markets across the world. It's been probably a safer route, some may say. But at the same time, I think these different pathways and the ones that are probably less tried and tested can be equally valuable as well. I think one of the things in larger FMCG firms that's pretty clear is the need to actually adopt and embrace some of the disciplines of more disruptive startup businesses. I think one of the challenges at the moment is to do what the core of FMCG businesses do well today, and do what startups do brilliantly and continue to disrupt and continue to innovate. So I think from that sense of what's a requirement in more established FMCG firms, I would argue that experience in a startup environment and an experience in a more disruptive environment would be an asset to bring back to an organisation. I think the challenge is how you, in a leadership role of one of these larger FMCG firms, is how you balance the two, how you balance the almost exploiting what you do brilliantly today, and then exploring these new worlds that are, I think, a requirement for continued growth in whatever industry you're in. Often there is a degree of inertia in some of these big businesses that get a little bit cautious, perhaps, of doing things that are a little bit left of centre or out of the ordinary. But if you've got that experience and having had that experience in a startup, I think that might be a really great balance to bring into a big organisation to be able to help others navigate through that challenge and being able to really ultimately be ambidextrous and do what you do today brilliantly and what you need to do tomorrow equally brilliantly as well.
Yeah, I think in my experience, again, recruiting across different types of organizations, my sense is very clear that the larger tier ones are much more open now to bringing in people who've got those experiences. It used to be, it's a very closed shop. You're either in that world or you're not. But there's a lot more kind of appetite for bringing somebody who's got that disruptive thinking, particularly if they've got both. If they've kind of got this blend of I get how tier one or larger structured company works, but I've spent time in this kind of disruptive environment, and that's a really powerful combination.
Yeah, and I mean, there are many big FMCG firms at the moment that have almost internal incubator businesses as well. Almost their own in-house versions of VC or private equity firms that identify new startup opportunities that look really attractive and are great bolt-on sort of inorganic acquisitions to their own business. So, that's a really interesting space to play in within FMCG as well, or even further beyond FMCG. But, if we're talking about our industries today, startup experience and then bringing that to almost like an in-house VC or an in-house private equity firm, I think would be a great asset to bring, because then you've almost got the license to behave like a startup, probably with the governance structures and framework of a big FMCG firm. And you get a bit of the benefits of both. So I think that there's an emerging appetite amongst some businesses, and an established appetite already in some businesses that have these in-house incubator, in-house sort of VC, PE type firms that would really benefit from startup experience coming into the organisation.
Yeah, great. A couple of good questions through on the chat, and feel free to contribute, guys, as we go. But first one from Catherine, Chris. As you think forward to the critical skills and capabilities sales organizations require to be future fit, where do you see major shifts versus where those skills may have been in the past?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's probably the question that's on so many people's minds at the moment, given, we all know from a consumer perspective, a lot of people are really keen to explore new brands, new opportunities. At times, with some brands, there's a degree of distrust that's happening, and an appetite from a consumer perspective for sort of local and more niche brands. So I think that's one key part. But I would say the most evident at the moment is definitely in this disruptive digital space. And it can be at its most simplest, just from the greater adoption, particularly through COVID, of digital commerce, digital transaction. I think that the need for greater capability in the digital commerce space and a better understanding of everything from the technical aspects of how to build a great e-commerce platform, to then operating and managing everything from fulfillment right through to the sale at the front end, and then advertising and making sure you're getting great returns on investment for your sales that run through those channels, are really, really key capabilities that are required these days. So I think that would be probably the most evident that I've seen in terms of the biggest shift that's required within FMCG. Some businesses are doing it quite well, and other businesses are really, really struggling with it. But I think that would probably be the standout for me, that would enable the biggest and continued opportunities for growth within FMCG.
On the senior roles I've been recruiting over the last 6 months, up to CMO and sales director level, it's interesting, I reckon, in every single brief there's been an enhanced bit around disruptive thinking. And bringing alternate channel knowledge or digital e-com, whereas it was a kind of a line in a position description a couple of years ago. It's a bigger section, it's a bigger weighted priority for a candidate. So I think leading into that and looking for that experience through your career, I think is really, really important. Chris, another question from the chat, which will move us a little bit more into the next section about you and your role and the role of a sales director. But from Daniel Roberts, with so much experience and heading up such a large team and role, what are your key tips for balance between family, professional, and health?
Particularly evident today, I think, given the lines are probably more blurred than ever when people are working from home, and you've always got a phone that's got an email on it beeping away at you. So it's a good question. Look, it's that one's I think done through trial and error almost. I think there's definitely the need to make sure that you manage your sort of personal energy in a role like this. I think for me, I often talk about your toolbox of skills that you have with this. And for me personally, my toolbox of skills to keep the right level of balance are things like exercising well, eating healthy. I do a bit of meditation and get on apps like Headspace and Calm and things like that. Equally, the social aspect of sort of switching off and getting away with friends and getting outdoors is an important part of it as well. That's just me though. Everyone's different, but I do think it's something that you actively need to work on. I don't think that it's something that naturally comes. No doubt everyone on this call who's listening has had periods of high stress and almost overload in their roles. And I think you actually need to actively manage it and make sure that you're identifying when you're going too far, what you're sacrificing, when you are going perhaps too far into the commitments of the workplace, and then the impacts on yourself and on others, and then make those changes. But everyone's different. I don't think that there's a recipe that is suitable for everyone, and you need to kind of try things and experiment a little bit to understand what is your decompression, what's your escape space. And I think once you've got that, just keep that in your toolbox, acknowledge that that's what's needed, and use them when the time is right. And sometimes you don't need to use them. Actually, you've got a balance and it seems to be okay, but other times you're really imbalanced, and I think that's when you need to delve deep into your toolbox of skills that you've got that are tried and tested and proven for you, and lean into them and make sure that you use them. I kind of think of it as almost it's a bit of a cliche and what I'm a fan of, but it's almost like being that corporate athlete is what are the things that really work for you to keep your performance high and your balance well suited to the requirements of what you need to do.
Yeah, and I also think organizations have accelerated their thinking during COVID on this whole area of ensuring that the people who work with them and for them are fit, mentally and in a performance space to do the role, and there's a lot more open-mindedness to the conversation and that whole approach of flexibility. Whereas I think going back a few years, it's maybe more on you and there was less availability from companies, but I think there's a lot more appetite for let's talk this through. We want people to be at their best, but we understand that's potentially different for everybody.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Wellbeing, particularly during COVID, I think has been a hot topic, right? I mean, as I was saying earlier, that the lines are blurred more now than they've ever been, and many businesses have responded really, really well to that and acknowledged that there are many elements of wellbeing that need to be managed. And I think this is where it ties actually quite closely into the D&I, gender diversity inclusion. For me, diversity inclusion in its more traditional sense was, and no doubt we'll talk about this in time, but gender parity was a really key focus, and I think it still should be. But equally, it's extended right the way through to everything like work-life balance, mental health, parenting at home, marital status, and if you've got kids that you're looking after at home whilst you're working from home. All of these things for me are a part of inclusion, but equally a part of well-being. And I think those are the elements that businesses need to be aware of more now than ever, given a lot more people are working from home and probably will continue to do so than the pre-COVID era.
Whilst we mentioned, let's get into that now, Chris. So you're chair of Embrace Difference Council for the Drinks Association. Talk to me, what is that?
Yeah, so the Embrace Difference Council in the Drinks Association is a body that has participants from the member organisations within the Drinks Association. So the member organisations are a lot of the supply base, and it's a voluntary group where we come together in service of advancing the diversity and inclusion agenda within member organisations, and ultimately attempt to make the drinks industry a really attractive industry and an industry of choice for people for their careers, and really attract, retain, and develop great talent within the business as well. So that's the sort of aim of the council. At the moment, the drinks industry is an industry that is fairly male-dominated historically. And one of the key first steps that we're keen to take is try to really build greater parity between genders in the industry and be more reflective of our society, not just our consumer base, but also our customer base as well. We're fortunate enough in Australia to live in a fantastic multicultural country. At the moment, our drinks industry is probably not as reflective of that as what it could be. And one of our key roles is to try and really shift the dial on that. A couple of ways that we're doing it. We've got two different work streams that are in that Embrace Difference Council. One of the work streams is really aiming to bring visibility to the metrics, if you like, within organisations around diversity and inclusion. So everything from gender across organisations, gender at different levels, promotions of men and women, but also things like family leave policies, bullying and harassment policies, wellbeing policies. So it really brings visibility to member organisations and compares them to one another and almost compares them to the standard that we're trying to meet across the Drinks Association. That's one part. We've also just recently finished a set of, if you like, maturity levels of toolkits, that everything from sort of foundation to integrated levels, where you can mark your business on the maturity curve of how far you are within diversity and inclusion, and actually use these toolkits to embed practices and principles within your organisation to move up the maturity curve of diversity and inclusion. So that's certainly one side of what we do as the Embrace Difference Council. And on the other side, it's just bringing inspiration, awareness and discussion as well. I think many businesses now are embracing International Women's Day on March the 8th of every year. And we do that collectively as an industry as well to, continue to deepen awareness around the conversation around gender parity, and also really celebrate what diversity and inclusion can bring to an industry in terms of, as I said earlier, attracting great talent, but also really benefiting from a diverse background of people that lie within the industry too. So it's a great organisation. I must admit, it's a fairly new one for me. I've only done the chair role for about 4 months or so. We've been pretty active of late. We only met yesterday, actually, getting the wider forum together, and a very passionate group of people, and a set of advocates that are working really hard within their member organisations to bring the diversity and inclusion agenda to life.
Fantastic. I think lots of great points in there. I think one of the early points you made around the need to, within drinks, to reflect, the customer and consumer base. I think the same can be said of sales as well, as a function. The function has evolved, as we talked about before, enormously in the last few years. And I think the talent coming into sales or in sales has been a little bit behind that curve, but it feels we're catching up, particularly in gender, but I think we've got a way to go. Yeah,
I think you're right. I mean, if we think about, population, obviously roughly 50-50 in men and women. If I look at the drinks industry at the moment, we've got a journey to go on to get that balance right. And certainly when you look at sales organisations of some companies, there's still a journey to be had there. And, I know recently, Christy was on the call from
William Grant.
From William Grant, talking about traditionally what's been a fairly male-dominated industry, and I think there are examples where it's been in the past, I think, particularly more of a challenging environment. I think that's changing today, which is great, and it's great to have people like Christy leading organisations and bringing continued awareness to that, and really role modelling what it takes to be a leader in this space. So long may it continue.
Yeah. Well, for those who are interested, jump onto the podcast version, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, the Spotify and Apple podcasts. In the 35 or so episodes we've recorded so far, about half of those are from female leaders, and the diversity piece gets a fair airing. It must be said in a good way. So it's a lot of good content for you to jump back into, guys. I would suggest. Cool. Question on jumping back to chat, actually, from Serge Costi from I know Serge from Freedom. What's your view on where e-com should sit functionally within an organization? In CPG, sometimes it's in sales, other times in marketing. In other industries, marketing is sales and there's no split. Now, actually, I just realized you'll know Serge too, because I think he was from your past will across in the past. But so one in from Serge. What do you reckon?
Well, firstly, big hi to Serge. I've not seen him for a while, but he's a good friend of mine, so it's nice to hear from him. It's a good question. It's one that I think many businesses, including Diageo, are grappling with. I think there are a couple of options, actually. And it depends on almost the intent and the appetite that you as an organisation have around how digitised you want to become. I think at its most basic, if you were just to have a for example, a direct-to-consumer channel, or you were managing pure play customers, and that was the extent of how far you wanted to go with your digital agenda, then I think having it within the sales function is a natural place for it to lie. On the other end of the spectrum, if you want to really re-engineer your business around being totally digital, and that's everything from having almost a digital hub and having all of your marketing digitally enabled and almost digital first. You talk performance marketing first from a digital context, and the bulk of your organization is really centered around that place. I would argue then that it's probably one you want to have elevated almost on your executive. And then there's probably everywhere in the middle. A hybrid model of that would be to have perhaps a digital hub or some of your digital marketeers sitting in the marketing team, and then you could split out the digital commerce side into your sales team. So I think there are a range of different options, and it's probably dependent on what you're trying to achieve as a business and how digitized do you want to become. So a couple of options there that are probably choices for leaders of different organisations to make, dependent on how much of a transformation that they may look to make for their organisation.
Great. Time for perhaps one or two more questions, Chris, as we move towards our finish. But we touched on this earlier, the kind of step to sales director, and a lot of people, again, on the call or the podcast, look at you and your role and you think, I could do that. But there is a step from whether you're leading a channel or a customer to leading a function and sitting on that ELT. For you, how big a step was it?
Well, given I think I'd stepped into the role 3 weeks prior to COVID, fairly big. It was probably the summary that I would put. Look, I mean, I had openly, I had a fairly good degree of experience coming into the role. I mean, I'd had a long tenure at Diageo. I knew the business well. I worked in a number of different markets. I'd been in Australia, I think, managing every customer that we had a partnership with, and then stepped into the role and got hit with COVID 3 weeks later. So I think no one is prepared for that, no matter how long you've been around. But look, it is a different step. I think it's one that, actually I was talking to one of my direct reports recently about this. It's one that's hard to prepare yourself with until you're in the role at times. At times it can be a lonely place. You're making decisions that won't be fully supported by some people, but they're in service of the business, and you have to make those choices. You have to make those choices often alone. But that's a part of the role, and a part of the role that you get used to. You also need to, depending on how you step into that role, potentially move from a peer of people that you've worked with in the past to being their line manager. And that can be a really different experience and a very different dynamic for both the people in your team and for you yourself. So that's very, very different. And then working with a group of executive peers as well that have previously been more senior to you, if you're moving into a role, is a different context too, where you're then working side by side. So I think it depends where you have come from into that role. If it's within the organisation and you're stepping up, I think that's a different dynamic to perhaps coming new into an organisation and stepping laterally in. There are many different facets to it, depending on your journey to get there. So I think that would probably be the way that I would most summarise it. But yeah, I mean, I think, and maybe it's amplified by COVID, but yeah, they're certainly stretching roles, and they're ones that require a lot of energy. Certainly with people that you're managing at a time with COVID, to ensure that they have the continued support that they need to perform well, and equally a lot of energy with customers who at times desperately need your support during times like COVID. There are a number of different initiatives that we ourselves have really put forward to customers that have been markedly different to what we've done in the past, and we've really stretched ourselves and as a business and stretched our thinking about breaking a few rules to do that. So yeah, they're great roles to be in. You learn a lot, and I think, as I said, it partly depends, I think, on the pathway to get there, to find what you need to succeed.
And finally, I'll ask one last question, Chris. But what next for you? Is it is a pathway to general management? Is it bigger sales roles? What part? Where do you go next?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's It was funny. I actually got asked that question about a month after getting into the role, which was a bit of a shock for me because, I had termed this role that I'm in now, or the sales director role, as a lighthouse role, and it's sort of a step in the career that was an aspiration for me. But you've got to pretty quickly have a think about what next. For me, I've, as I was talking to earlier, got a real interest in emerging brands, emerging ideas. We were talking earlier around incubator businesses within FMCG firms, and at Diageo we've got a great business called Distill Ventures, which is an organisation that has a stream identifying new technologies and also new drinks businesses that may forge opportunities for the future. So that's certainly of interest to me. I mean, they are based overseas, and it's likely an international move is probably next for me if I stay with Diageo. So that's of interest. Equally, working in another market, I've not worked in the US market. For Diageo, it's a very sizable market. It's one that we also have a different route to market structure with a distributor network over there. It's a sizable beer market with Guinness and a range of other brands that we've got as breweries and operations over there. And it's also a really emerging premix market with the explosion of seltzer as well. So there are a lot of different dynamics in that market that are really appealing. So I think one of those two spaces for me is probably next. But at the same time, I've sort of set an ambition here in Australia to achieve one or two more things with our organisation and with our team, and I'm really committed to doing that first and foremost. So there's a few different options within the Diageo network for me, and equally outside of it as well, which we were talking to earlier, and continually exploring other opportunities which might be of equal interest. But I think creating options is the important part for yourself, no matter where you are in your career, and having a range of options that you can explore and pursue. I think is an important part to stay motivated and also continue building your experience.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself, Chris. Thanks for sharing. But also my overbearing kind of advice to anybody is that always maintain a breadth to your options and your pathways. Don't focus on one role and one role only, because that may not come up, and it's not the only way forward. There's lots of always different options. So, Chris, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. Loved so many parts of that conversation. Really, really interesting. And to reiterate, guys, if you want to re-listen to this, then jump onto the podcast that will go live next Thursday. Your Future in Sales and Marketing. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Please rate us as well. Actually, that really helps others find us who are perhaps seeking career advice within the sales and marketing world. Next up, we've got a live session for the marketing director Incubator. Lots of salespeople can jump onto that too. You're very welcome. November 4th, Victoria Baker, who's a brand director for GWA. The next live sales director Incubator is next month, November 18th. We've got Hannah Fold on from Unilever. So lots to look forward to. A few more episodes coming up as well before the end of the year. So stick with us and you'll learn lots. Thanks again, Chris. That was excellent.
Yeah, pleasure, mate. Thanks for the opportunity to talk this morning.
No worries. Have a great Thursday, guys, and we shall see you all again soon.